Chapter 2 In Memoriam. Harry was bleeding, clutching his right hand in his left and swearing under his breath. He shouldered open his bedroom door. There was a crunch of breaking china. He had trodden on a cup of cold tea that had been sitting on the floor outside his bedroom door. What the? He looked around. The landing of the number 4 private drive was deserted. Possibly the cup of tea was Dudley's idea of a clever booby trap. Keeping his bleeding hand elevated, Harry scraped the fragments of cup together with the other hand and threw them into the already crammed bin just visible inside his bedroom door. Then he tramped across to the bedroom to run his finger under the tap. It was stupid, pointless, irritating beyond belief that Evil had 4 days left of being unable to perform magic. But he had to admit to himself that this jagged cut in his finger would have defeated him. He had never learned how to repair wounds, and how he came to think of it, particularly in light of his immediate plans, this seemed a serious flaw in his magical education. Making a mental note to ask Hermione how it was done, he used a large wad of toilet paper to mop up as much of tea as he could, before returning to his bedroom and slamming the door behind him. Harry had spent the morning completely emptying his school trunk for the first time since he had packed it 6 years ago. At the start of the intervening school years, he had merely skimmed off the topmost 3/4 of the content and replaced or updated them, leaving a layer of general drips at the bottom: old quills, desiccated beetles, eyes, single shop that no longer fitted. Minutes previously, Harry had plunged his hand into this mulch, experienced a stabbing pain in the fourth finger of his right hand, and withdrew it to see a lot of blood. He now proceeded a little more cautiously. Kneeling down beside the trunk again, he groped again in the bottom, and after retrieving an old badge that flicked feebly between support, Cedric Diggory, and Potter's things, a cracked and worn-out sneak scope, and a gold locket inside which a note signed R.A.B. had been hidden, he finally discovered the sharp edge that had done the damage. He recognized it at once. It was a 2-inch long fragment of the enchantment mirror that his dead ghost father Sirius had gave him. Harry laid it aside and felt cautiously around the trunk for the rest, but nothing more remained of his godfather's last gift except powder glass, which clung to the deepest layer of debris like glittering grit. Harry sat up and examined the jagged piece on which he had cut himself, seeing nothing but his own bright green eye reflected back at him. Then he placed the fragment on the top of Morgan's Daily Prophet, which lay underneath on the bed, and attempted to stem the sudden upsurge of bitter memories, the stab of regret and longing that discovery of the broken mirror had occasioned by attacking the rest of the rubbish in the trunk. It took another hour to empty it completely, throw away the useless items, and store the remainder in piles according to the whether or not he would need them from now on. His school and Quidditch robes, curtain, parchments, quills, and most of his textbooks were piled in a corner to be left behind. He wondered what his aunt and uncle would do with them, burn them in the dead of night, probably, as if They were evidence of some dreadful crime. His Mughal clothing, invisibility cloak, potion making kit, certain books, the photograph album Hagrid had once given him, a stack of letters, and his wand been repacked into an old rucksack. In a front pocket were the murderous map and the locket with the note signed RAB inside it. The locket was accorded this place of honor not because it was valuable in all usual senses, it was worthless, but because of what it had cost to attain. This left a sizable stack of newspapers sitting on his desk beside his snowy owl, Hedwig, one of each of the days Harry had spent at private drive this summer. He got up off the floor, stretched and moved across his desk. Hedwig made no movement as he began to flick through the newspapers, throwing them onto the rubbish pile one by one. The owl was asleep, or else faking. She was angry with Harry about limited amount of time she was allowed out of her cage at the moment. As he neared the bottom of the pile of newspaper, Harry slowed down, searching for one particular edition which he knew had arrived shortly after he had returned to private drive for the summer. He remembered that there had been a small mention on the front about resignation of Charity Burbage, the Muggle studies teacher at Hogwarts. At last he found it. Turning to page 10, he sank into his desk chair and reread the article he had been looking for. Albus Dumbledore Remembered by Alpheus Doge. I met Albus Dumbledore at the age of 11 on our first day at Hogwarts. Our mutual attraction was undoubtedly due to the fact that we both felt ourselves to be outsiders. I had contracted dragon pox shortly before arriving at school, and while I was no longer contagious, my pock-marked visage and greenish hue did not encourage many to approach me. For his parts, Albus has arrived at Hogwarts under the burden of unwanted notoriety. Scarcely a year previously, his father, Percival, had been convicted of a savage and well-published attack upon 3 young Muggles. Albus never attempted to deny that his father, who was die in Azkaban, had continued this crime. On the contrary, when I plucked up courage to ask him, he assured me that he knew his father to be guilty. Beyond that, Dumbledore refused to speak of the sad business. Through many attempts to make him do so, some indeed were disposed to praise his father's action, and amused that Albus, too, was a Muggle hater. They could not have been more mistaken, as anybody who knew Albus would attest. He never revealed the remotest anti-Muggle tendency. Indeed, his determined support for Muggle rights gained him many enemies in subsequent years. In a matter of months, however, Albus' own fame has begun to eclipse that of his father. By the end of his first year, he would never again be known as the son of a Muggle hater, but as nothing more or less than the most brilliant student ever seen at the school. Those of us who were privileged to be his friends benefited from his example, not to mention his help and encouragement, with which he was always generous. He confessed to me in later life that he knew even then that his greatest pleasure lay in teaching. He not only won every prize of note that the school offered, he was soon in regular correspondence with the most notable magical names of the day, including Nicholas Flamel, the celebrated alchemist Bathilda Bagshot, the noted historian, and Adelbert Waffling, the magical theoretician. Several of his papers found their way into learned publications such as Transfiguration Today, Challenges and Charming, and the Practical Pioneer. Dumbledore's future career seemed likely to be meteoritic. And the only question that remained was when he would become Minister of Magic, though it was often predicted in later years that he was on point of taking the job. However, he never had ministerial ambitions. 3 years later, we had started at Hogwarts. Albus' brother Aberforth arrived at school. They were not alike. Aberforth was never bookish and, unlike Albus, preferred to settle arguments by dueling rather than through reasoned discussion. However, it is quite wrong to suggest, as some have, that the brothers were not friends. They rubbed along as comfortably as two such different boys could do. In fairness to Aberforth, it must be admitted that living in Albus' shadow cannot have been an altogether comfortable experience. Being continually outshone was an occupational hazard of being his friend and cannot have been any more pleasurable as a brother. When Albus and I left Hogwarts, we intended to take the traditional tour of the world together, visiting and observing foreign wizards before pursuing our separate careers. However, tragedy intervened. On the very eve of our trip, Albus' mother, Kendra, died, leaving Albus the head and sole breadwinner of the family. I postponed my departure long enough to pay my respect at Kendra's funeral, then left for what was now to be a solitary journey with a younger brother and sister to care for, and little Cool left to them. There could no longer be any question of Albus accompanying me. That was the period of our lives when we had least contact. I wrote to Albus describing, perhaps intensively, the wonders of my journey from narrow escapes from chimeras in Greece to experiments of Egyptian alchemists. His letter told me little of his day-to-day life, which I guessed to be frustratingly dull for such a brilliant wizard. Immersed in my own experiences, it was with honor that I heard, toward the end of my year's travels, that yet another tragedy had struck the Dumbledores, the death of his sister, Ariana. Though Ariana had been in poor health for a long time, the blow, coming so soon after the loss of their mother, had a profound effect on the both of her brothers, all those closest to Albus, and I count myself one of the lucky number agree that Ariana's death and Albus' feelings of personal responsibility for it, though of course he was guiltiness, left their mark upon him forevermore. I returned home to find a young man who had experienced a much older person's suffering. Albus was more reserved than before, and much less light-hearted. To add to his misery, the loss of Ariana had led not to a renewed closeness between Albus and Aberforth, but to estrangement. In time, this would lift. In later years, they re-established, if not a close relationship, then certainly a cordial one. However, he rarely spoke to his parents or of Ariana from then on, and his friends learned not to mention them. Other quills will describe the trends of the following years. Dumbledore's innumerable contribution to the store of wizarding knowledge including his discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, will benefit generation to come, as well the wisdom he displayed in the many judgments he made while chief warlock of the Vision mod. They say still that no wizarding duel ever matched that between Dumbledore and Grindelwald in 1945. Those who witnessed it have written on the terror and away they felt as they watched these two extraordinary wizards to battle. Dumbledore's triumph and its consequences for the wizarding world are considered a turning point in magical history to match the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy or the downfall of he who must not be named. Albus Dumbledore was never proud or vain. He could find something to value in anyone, however apparently insignificant or wretched, and I believe that his early losses endowed him with great humanity and sympathy. I shall miss his friendship more than I can say, but my loss is as nothing compared to the wizarding words. That he was the most inspiring and the best loved of all Hogwarts headmaster cannot be in question. He died as he lived, working always for the greater good, and to his last hour as willing to stretch out a heart to small boy with dragon pox as he was on the day that I met him. Harry finished reading by continuing to gaze at the picture accompanying the obituary. Dumbledore was wearing his similar kindly smile, but as he peered over the top of his half-moon spectacle, he gave the impression, even in newsprint, of X-raying Harry, whose sadness mingled with a sense of humiliation. He had thought he knew Dumbledore quite well, but ever since reading this obituary, he had been forced to recognize that he had barely known him at all. Never once had he imagined Dumbledore's childhood or youth. It was as though he had sprung into being a Harry had known him. Venerable and silver-haired and old, the idea of a teenage Dumbledore was simply odd, like to imagine a stupid Hermione or friendly blast ended scared. He had never thought to ask Dumbledore about his past. No doubt it would have felt strange, impertinent even, but after all, it had been common knowledge that Dumbledore had taken part in the legendary duel with Grindelwald, and Harry had not thought to ask Dumbledore what that had been like, nor about any of other famous achievements. No, they had always discussed Harry's past, Harry's future, Harry's plans, and it seems to Harry now, despite the fact that his future was so dangerous and so uncertain, that he had missed irreplaceable opportunities when he had failed to ask Dumbledore more about himself. Even though the only personal question he had ever asked his headmaster was also the only one he suspected that Dumbledore had not answered honestly. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. After several minutes' thought, Harry tore the obituary out of the prophet, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside the first volume of Practical Defense Magic and its uses against the dark arts. When he threw the rest of the newspaper on the rubbish pile and turned to the face the room, it was much tidier. The only thing left out of place was today's daily prophet, still lying on the bed, and on the top of it, the piece of broken mirror. Harry across the room, slit the mirror fragment of today's prophet, and unfolded the newspaper. He had merely glanced at the headline when he had taken the rolled up paper from the delivery owl early that morning and thrown it aside. After nothing that it said nothing about Voldemort. Harry was sure that the ministry was learning on the prophet to suppress news about Voldemort. It was only now, therefore, that he saw what he had missed. Across the bottom half of the front page, a smaller headline was set over a picture of Dumbledore striding along looking harried. Dumbledore, the truth at last. Coming next week, the shocking story of the flawed genius, considered by many to be the greatest wizard of his generation, stripping away the popular image of senior silver-beard wisdom. Rita Skeeter reveals such distributed childhood, the lawless youth, the lifelong feuds, and the guilty secrets that Dumbledore carried to his grave. Why was the man tipped to be Minister of Magic content to remain a mere headmaster? What was the real purpose of the secret organization known as the Order of Phoenix? How did Dumbledore really meet his end? The answer to these and many more questions are explored in the explosive new biography, The Life and the Lies of Albus Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter, exclusively interviewed by Betty Beth White, page 13, inside. Harry ripped open the paper and found page 13. The article was topped with a picture showed by another familiar face, a woman wearing jeweled glasses with elaborately curled blonde hair, her teeth bared in what was clearly supposed to be a winning smile, wiggling her fingers up at him, doing his best to ignore his nauseating image. Harry, read on. In person, Rita Skeeter is much warmer and softer than her famously furious quill portrait might suggest, greeting me in the hallway of her cozy home. She leads me straight into the kitchen for a cup of tea and a slice of pound cake, and it goes without saying, a streaming word of Ferris gossip. Well, of course, Dumbledore is a biographer's dream, says Skeeter. Such a long, full life. I'm sure my book will be the first of very, very many. Skeeter was certainly quick off the mark. Her 900-page book was completed a mere 4 weeks after Dumbledore's mysterious death in June. I asked her how she managed this super-fast feat. Oh, where you have been a journalist as long as I have, working to a deadline is a second nature. I knew that the wizarding world was clamoring for the full story, and I wanted to be the first to meet that need. I mentioned the recent widely publicized remark of Elvis Dodge, special advisor to the Voldemort and long-standing friend of Albus Dumbledore's, that Skeeter's book contains less fact than a chocolate frog card. Skeeter throws back her head and laughs. Darling Dodgy, I remember interviewing him a few years back about mere people rights. Bless him. Completely gaga, seems to think we are sitting at the bottom of Lake Windermere. Kept telling me to watch out of trout. And yet, Alpheus Dodge, accusation of inaccuracy had been echoed in many places. Does Skeeter really feel that 4 short weeks have been enough to gain a full picture of Dumbledore's long and extraordinary life? Oh, my dear, beams Skeeter, raping me affectionately across the knuckles. You know as well as I do know how much information can be generated by a fat bag of galleons. Our ears follow here the word no, and nice, sharp, quick quotes quill. People were going to dish the dirt on Dumbledore. Anyway, not everyone thought he was so wonderful. You know, he trod on an awful lot of importantness. But old dodgy dog can get off his hippogriff because I have had access to a source of most journalists would swap their words for. One who has never spoken in public before and who was close to Dumbledore during the most turbulent and disrupting phase of his youth. The advanced publicity for Skeeter's biography has certainly suggested that there will be a shocks in store for those who believe Dumbledore to have led a blameless life. What were the biggest surprise he uncovered? I ask. Now, come off it, Betty. I'm not giving away all the highlights before anybody's bought the book. Laughs Skeeter. But I can promise that anybody who still thinks Dumbledore was white as his beard and his father raved about king, let's just say that nobody had hearing him rage against you know who would have dreamed that he dabbled in the dark arts himself in his youth. And for a wizard who spent his later years pleading for a tolerance, he wasn't exactly broad minded when he was younger. Yes, Albus Dumbledore had an extremely marky past, not to mention that very fishy family, when he worked for so hard to keep hushed up. I ask whether Skeeter is referring to Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth, whose conviction by the Wingarmot for misuse of magic caused a major scandal 15 years ago. Oh, Aberforth is just tip of the tongue, laughed Skeeter. No, no, I am talking about much worse than a brother with a fondness for fiddling about with goats, worse than the muggle maiming father. Dumbledore couldn't keep either of them quiet. Anyway, they were both charged by Vijamod. No, it's the mother and the sister that interviewed me, and a little digging uncovered positiveness of nastiness. But as I say, you will have to wait for chapters 9 to 12 for full details. All I can say now is it's no wonder Dumbledore never talked about how his nose got broken. Family skeletons notwithstanding, does Skeeter deny the brilliance that led to Dumbledore's many magical discoveries? He had brains, she conceded, although many of now question whether she could really take full credit for his supposed achievements. As I reveal in the chapter 16, Xavier Delancey claims he had already discovered 8 uses of dragon's blood when Dumbledore borrowed his papers. But the importance of some of the Dumbledore's achievement cannot, I venture, be denied. What of his famous defeat of Grindelwald? Oh, now I'm glad you mentioned Grindelwald, says Skeeter, with a tantalized smiling. I'm afraid those who go debate over Dumbledore's spectacular victory must praise themselves for a bombshell, or perhaps a dung bomb. Very dirty business indeed. All I say is don't be so sure that really was a spectacular duel of legion. After they had read many books, people may be forced to conclude that Grindelwald simply conjured a white handkerchief from the end of his wand and come quietly. Skeeter refuses to give any more away on his intriguing subject, so we turn instead to the relationship that will undoubtedly fascinate her readers more than any other. Oh, yes, says Skeeter, nodding briskly. I devote an entire chapter to the whole Potter Dumbledore relationship. It it's been called unhealthy, even sinister. Again, your readers will have to buy my book for the whole story, but there is no question that Dumbledore took an unnatural interest in Potter from the word go. Whether that was really in the boy's best interest, well, we'll see. It's certainly an open secret that Potter has had a most trouble adolescence. I ask whether Skeeter is still in touch with Harry Potter, whom she so famously interviewed last year. A breakthrough piece in which Potter spoke exclusively of his conviction that you know who had written. Oh, yes, we have developed a close bond, says Skeeter. Poor Potter has few real friends, and we met at one of the most testing moments of his life, the Triwizard Tournament. I am probably one of the only people alive who can say that they know the real Harry Potter, which leads us nearly to many rumors still circulating about Dumbledore's finest hours. Does Skeeter believe that Potter was there when Dumbledore died? Well, I don't want to say too much. It's all in the book. But I witness inside Hogwarts Castle saw Potter running away from the scene moments after Dumbledore fell, jumped, or was pushed. Potter later gave evidence against Severus Snape, a man against whom he has notorious grudge. Is everything as it seems? That is for wizarding community to decide once they have read my book. On the intriguing note, I take my leave. There can be no doubt that Skater has scored an instant bestseller. Dumbledore's legends and admirers, meanwhile, may well be trembling at what is soon to emerge about their hero. Harry reached the bottom of the article but continued to stare blankly at the page. Revulsion and fury knows him like vomit. He bailed up the newspaper and threw it with all his force at the wall, where it joined the rest of the rubbish heaped around his overflowing bin. He began to stride blindly around the room, opening empty drawers and picking up books only to replace them on the same piles, barely conscious of what he was doing, as random phrases from Rita's article echoed in his head. An entire chapter to the whole Potter Dumbledore relationship. It's been called unhealthy, even sinister. He dabbled in the dark arts himself in his youth. I have had access to a source most journalists would swap their bonds for. Lies, Harry bellowed, and through the windows he saw the next door neighbor who had paused to restart his lawnmower look up nervously. Harry sat down hard on the bed. The broken bit of mirror danced away from him. He picked it up, turned it over in his finger, thinking of Dumbledore and the lies with which Rita Skeeter was defaming him. A flash of brightest blue, Harry froze his cut finger, slipping on the judge edge of the mirror again. He had imagined it, he must have done. He glanced over his shoulder, but the wall was sticky peach color of Aunt Petunia's choosing. There was nothing blue there for the mirror to reflect. He peered into the mirror fragment again and saw nothing but his own bright green eye looking back at him. He had imagined it. There was no other explanation. Imagined it. Because he had been thinking of his dead headmaster. If anything was certain, it was that the bright blue eyes of Albus Dumbledore would never pierce him again.